Hello, welcome back to the Book of Joy by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and His Holiness Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Chapter 2, Part 2 of Chapter 2. It's been quite a long time since I last read any of this book, and I'm sorry for that. There's been quite a lot of things going on, but I have decided not to give up and to carry on reading in the hope that it can bring you some joy. So, now there's one thing I've got to do before I start reading. Oh yeah, are you sitting comfortably? Good, then I'll begin. Is joy a feeling that comes and surprises us, or is it a more dependable way of being? I asked. For the two of you, joy seems to be something much more enduring. Your spiritual practice hasn't made you sombre and serious, it's made you more joyful. So how can people cultivate that sense of joy as a way of being, not just a temporary feeling? The Archbishop and the Dalai Lama looked at each other, and the Archbishop gestured to the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama squeezed the Archbishop's hand and began. Yes, it's true, joy is something different from happiness. When I use the word happiness, in a sense I mean satisfaction. Sometimes we have a painful experience, but that experience, as you've said, with birth can bring great satisfaction and joyfulness. Let me ask you, the Archbishop jumped up, you've been in exile 50 what years? 56. 56 years from a country that you love more than anything else. Why are you not morose? Morose? The Dalai Lama asked, not understanding the word. As Jimpa hurried to translate morose into Tibetan, the Archbishop clarified. Sad. The Dalai Lama took the Archbishop's hand in his, as if comforting him, while reviewing these painful events. The Dalai Lama's storied discovery as a reincarnation of the Dalai Lama meant that at the age of 2 he was swept away from his rural home in Amdo province of eastern Tibet to the 1,000-roomed Potala Palace in the capital city of Lhasa. There he was raised in opulent isolation as a future spiritual political leader of Tibet and as a godlike reincarnation of the Bodhisattva of compassion. After the Chinese invasion of Tibet in 1950, the Dalai Lama was thrust into politics. At the age of 15, he found himself the ruler of 6 million people and facing an all-out and desperately unequal war. For 9 years, he tried to negotiate with communist China for his people's welfare and sought political solutions to the country as the country came to be annexed. In 1959, during an uprising that risks resulting in a massacre, the Dalai Lama decided with a heavy heart to go into exile. The odds of successfully escaping to India were frighteningly small, but to avoid a confrontation and bloodbath, he left in the night dressed as a palace guard. He had to take off his recognizable glasses, and his blurred vision must have heightened his sense of fear and uncertainty as the escape party snuck by garrisons of People's Liberation Army. They endured sandstorms and snowstorms as they summited 19,000-foot mountain peaks during their 3-week escape. One of my practices comes from an ancient Indian teacher, the Dalai Lama began, answering the Archbishop's question. He taught that when you experience some tragic situation, think about it. If there's no way to overcome the tragedy, then there is no use worrying too much. So I practice that. The Dalai Lama was referring to the 8th century Buddhist master Shantideva, who wrote, "If something can't be done about a situation, what need is there for dejection? And if something can be done about a situation, what need is there for dejection? And if nothing can be done about it, what need is there for to be dejected?" The Archbishop cackled, perhaps because it seemed almost too incredible that someone could stop worrying just because it was pointless. "Yes, but I think people know it with their head," he touched both index fingers to his scalp. "You know that it doesn't help worrying, but they still worry. Many of us have become refugees," the Dalai Lama tried to explain, "and there are lots of difficulties in my own country. When I look only at that," he said, cupping his hands into a small circle, "then I worry." He widened his hands, breaking the circle open. "But when I look at the world, there are a lot of problems, even within the People's Republic of China. For example, the Hui Muslim community in China has a lot of problems and suffering. And then outside China, there are many more problems and many more sufferings. When we see these things, we realize that not only do we suffer, but so do so many of our human brothers and sisters. So when we look at the same events from a wider perspective, we will reduce the worrying and our own suffering." I was struck by the simplicity and profundity of what the Dalai Lama was saying. This was far from "Don't worry, be happy," as a popular Bobby McFerrin song says. This was not a denial of pain and suffering, but a shift of perspective from oneself and towards others, from anguish to compassion, seeing that others are suffering as well. The remarkable thing about what the Dalai Lama was describing is that as we recognize others' suffering and realize that we are not alone, our pain lessens. Often we hear about another's tragedy. It makes us feel better about our own situation. This is quite different from what the Dalai Lama was doing. He was not contrasting his situation with others, but uniting his situation with others, enlarging his identity and seeing that he and the Tibetan people were not alone in their suffering. This recognition that we are all connected, whether Tibetan, Buddhist or Hui Muslims, is the birth of empathy and compassion. I wondered how the Dalai Lama's ability to shift his perspective might relate to the adage, "Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional." It is truly possible to experience pain, whether the pain of an injury or an exile, without suffering. There is a sutra or a teaching of the Buddha called the Salapa Sutta that makes a similar distinction between our feelings of pain and the suffering that comes as a result of our response to pain. When touched with a feeling of pain, the uninstructed, ordinary person sorrows, grieves, and laments, beats his breast, becomes distraught. So he feels two pains, physical and mental, but as if they were to shoot a man with an arrow, and right afterwards were to shoot him with another one, so that he feels the pain of two arrows. It seems that the Dalai Lama was suggesting that by shifting our perspective to a broader, more compassionate one, we can avoid the worry and suffering that is the second arrow. Then another thing. the Dalai Lama continued. There are different aspects to every event. For example, we lost our country and became refugees, but that same experience gave us new opportunities to see more things. For me personally, I've had more opportunities to meet with different people, different spiritual practitioners, like you, and also scientists. This new opportunity arrived because I am a refugee. If I remained in the Patala, in Lhasa, I would have stayed in what has often been described as a golden cage. The Lama, the holy Dalai Lama, who is now sitting up, shifting as he once had, sitting up stiffly as he once had to when he was the cloistered spiritual head of the Forbidden Kingdom. So personally, I prefer the last 5 decades of refugee life. It's more useful, more opportunity to learn, to experience life. Therefore, if you look from one angle, you feel, oh, how bad, how sad. But if you look from another angle at that same tragedy, that same event, you see that it gives new opportunities. So it's wonderful. That's the main reason that I am not sad or morose. There's a Tibetan saying, wherever you have friends, that's your country. Wherever you receive love, that's your home. That's really beautiful. There was an audible gasp in the room at this poignant saying, and at its its ability to ease, if not erase, the pain of a half-century spent in exile. That's very beautiful, the Archbishop said. Also, the Dalai Lama continued, whoever gives you love, that's your parents. So I consider you, although you are only 4 years older than me, as my father. I think you never could have had your children at the age of 4, so you're not my real father, but I do consider you as a father. What you said is quite wonderful, the Archbishop began, still clearly moved by the Dalai Lama's response to exile. I think I would just add to it by saying to our sisters and brothers out there, anguish and sadness in many ways are things that you cannot control. They happen. Supposing somebody hits you, the pain causes an anguish in you and an anger. You might want to retaliate. But as you grow in the spiritual life, whether as a Buddhist or as a Christian or any other tradition, you are able to accept anything that happens to you. You accept it not as a result of you being sinful, that you are blameworthy because of what has happened. It's part of the warp and woof of life. It's going to happen whether you like it or not. There are going to be frustrations in life. The question is not how do I escape? It is how can I use this as something positive, just as you, Your Holiness, have just described. Nothing, I think, can be more devastating in many ways than being turfed out of your own home country. And a country is not just a country. I mean, it's part of you. You are part of it in a way. That is very difficult to describe to other people. By rights, the Dalai Lama should be a sourpuss. The Dalai Lama asked Jimpa for the translation of sourpuss. The Archbishop decided to explain it himself. It's when you do that face. He was pointing at the Dalai Lama's quizzical expression and pursed lips, which did look a little like he had bitten into a lemon. Just that face, just like that. You look like a real sourpuss. The Dalai Lama was still trying to understand how one's puss could look sour, and Jimpa was still trying to translate. And then, when you smile, your face lights up, and it's because, in a very large measure, you have transmuted what would have been totally negative. You transmuted it into goodness, because you have not you have not said, well, how can I be happy? You've not said that. You've said, how can I help to spread compassion and love? And people everywhere in the world, even when they don't understand your English, they come and they fill stadiums. I'm not really jealous. I speak far better English than you, and I don't get so many people coming to hear me as they come to you. And you know what? I don't think they come to listen. They may be doing that a bit. What they come for is that you embody something which they feel, because some of the things that you say, in a sense, are obvious. Yet it's not the words, it's the spirit behind those words. It is when you sit and you tell people that suffering, frustration are not the determinants of who we are. It is that we can use these things that are seemingly negative for a positive effect. And I hope we can convey to God's children out there how deeply they are loved, how deeply, deeply precious they are to this God. Even the despised refugee, whose name no one seems to know. I look frequently at pictures of people fleeing from violence, and there's so much of it. Look at the children. I say that God is crying, because that is not how God wanted us to live. But you see, again, even in those circumstances, you have these people who come from other parts of the world to try to help, to make things better. And through the tears, God begins to smile. And when God sees you and hears how you try to help God's children, God smiles. The Archbishop was now beaming, and he whispered the words, "Smile as if it were the holy name of God." He wants to ask another question, the Archbishop said, seeing that I was leaning forward. It was extraordinary to hear how deeply they were engaging with joy and suffering, but at the rate we were going, we wouldn't get through 1/10 of the questions we needed to ask. The Dalai Lama slapped the Archbishop's hand and said, "We have several days, so it's not a problem. If our interview is only 30 minutes or 1 hour, then we have to shorten our answers." "You must shorten your answers," the Archbishop said. "I am brief. First let's have tea, and then I will be brief." Oh. That's the end of that chapter. Join me for chapter 3 of the Book of Joy. Thank you. Hope you're doing well out there. Sending lots of love.